Hi, this is Doug Vogt from the Die-Hole Foundation again. This is going to be video series 6. It's going to be in 2 parts. It covers Moses and the 10 code systems. This video is going to cover 7 of the code systems. Some were known by rabbis and priests and others were not. The later ones were definitely not known by the rabbis except in the First Temple period, and the second video will have stuff that they just didn't know at all. Anyway, we'll get started. We're going to cover Hebrew large numbering and small numbering, composite word code, and the algebraic principle of A equals B, B is equal C, therefore is A equals the C, what the number 7 really represents, and what the number 400 represents, in front of the chapter and verse code. That was a pretty important one. Okay, we'll start in. I'm going to be teaching from this book. This has all the code systems, chapters 1 through 4. And this one, chapter 9, has some of the information for the codes. The Torah, you have to look at it like an onion. And I have an onion skin here. Not too thin. I mean, not much of it to it. The surface story is like this skin. If you don't know these 10 code systems that Moses created, that, by the way, later civilizations like the Romans and the Greeks used these code systems in their writings, you can't figure out the different stories, which are akin to these layers in the onion, what he's really saying, what he's really getting at. You can't forget the fact that he pulled out 2 tablets that 304,805 symbols on it, 22 symbols, and he had to make a surface story out of this. He couldn't change the letters, he couldn't add any letters, couldn't subtract any, and he was stuck. This is a very, very difficult task he had. So he had to create basically the language of the Hebrew language that we have from scratch. And that's what you have to keep in mind. That's why you had to create these code systems. He had no choice. Now, this I don't consider a code system. This is the skip patterns. You've heard other authors talk about having prophecy in the skip patterns. I don't go along with that, because if you look in a Hebrew dictionary, you could find like a 3 or 4 or 5 letter word, and it has like 8 or 10 different translations. It's all depending on what diacriticals, accent marks, they put above, the side, or below it, which is their vowels. But that's kind of nuts. Since the Torah had no such diacritical marks, how do you know what the word is? And in my research, like I mentioned in video series 2 on the Hebrew alphabet, the creation of it, I found places where they had a 2-letter word. It was really a 4-letter word, and they had 2 of the letters, so they assumed it was that word. They made a lot of assumptions. Okay, at any rate, when Moses was creating the language, he did use skip patterns. This is a section from when Adam is naming the plants and the animals. So here's some examples. I've made them in different colors. I hope you can see it. If you're on a regular PC, you should be able to see this. On a cell phone, I don't know. Barley is found 28 skips, minus 28 skips. That would be this is for barley. Wheat is this dark color, and that was every plus 5 skips. Vine here, there. And then dates, these dark ones, etc. Olive, figs, pomegranate. And there's more. But the point is he did use this method. Now, remember, like I explained in video series 2 on the Hebrew alphabet, we estimate that this is 30 symbols across. Each column had 50 of these symbols lined up like this, but probably tighter together. And 5 columns with each column 50 characters and 304 lines per column. And he just basically did skip patterns to create the letters, the words, for different things, different objects. Tough job. The first code systems is Hebrew large numbering and small numbering. In Hebrew, it's called misperkoten. In Greek, it's called itzapsefa. And Moses was the originator of it. It wasn't the Greeks. It wasn't Pythagoras at all. So he had no numbers. He just had 22 symbols. So Aleph is 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes on like this. And then from Yud, it's 10. Kaf, 20. It goes on like that for each one of the letters. Nun is 50. And I'll get on this side. Pei is 80, 80, 90, all the way up to 400. There's your 22 letters. But he needed more to make big numbers. So he did make final letters, but he did not have final designs. It was still the original design. You just had to know it was the end of the word. Might be a big number, not really part of a word. Just to confuse things even more so. You could realize what a tough job this was. And even interpreting these, you know, it had no word breaks. Where are the word breaks on this stuff? Now, that's one. That's regular numbering. Small numbering is pretty simple. You take off all the zeros, chop off all the zeros, and you wind up with small numbering. The Greeks and the Romans used that extensively. They also used sequence system. I don't think Moses used sequence system that I know of. Anyway, I'll continue. The third code system was composite word codes, used very often by him. In other words, if you're telling a story and you create a word for a name for somebody or something, but when you take the name apart, it means something. Either it's parallel to the story, which you'll see an example of, or it means something else he's trying to say. That's the hidden stories in there. Now, a lot of these stories are about Joseph. Remember, I think it's like about 25% of Genesis is about Joseph, either directly or indirectly. You have to ask yourself why. Okay. I'll start with Joseph has two sons. His oldest one was Manasseh. We'll take this. The traditional definition of Manasseh, or meaning, was, "For God hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house." Now, when he says all my father's house, he forgot everything about his father and what he believed in. The word Nasa, second half of the word, means to forget. The Mim is 40 in large numbering, and you'll learn later in this video what 40, 60, and 70 means. It is not, it means Joseph. You'll understand why. And then finally, okay, so the final meaning is Joseph forgot his past. Well, that kind of says it here. And all my father's house. He really forgot everything, all his tradition, what he believed in, everything. The younger son was Ephraim. That's how it's spelled. And the traditional translation of the word is, "For God hath made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Okay, the first part of the word means fruitful. Makes sense. The first letter you should take as the Aleph as first, one. The last one, the Mim, again, means Joseph. You'll understand why. So the final meaning of this thing, from here, 4152, is, the hidden meaning is Joseph became the richest. Moses isn't kidding. He was the richest. You'll understand why. I wrote a volume 2 of Decoding the Hebrew Scriptures is about Joseph and tells the whole story. This should be made into a movie. It's got everything. Intrigue, murder, theft, greed. It's wonderful. Sexy women, etc. Anyway, that's one example. Next, after Joseph is made prime minister by the Pharaoh, the crowd yells Abrech at him, like a title. Now this is an example where Moses is showing that a longer word means maybe the parallel to the surface story. So the first two letters, Aleph Bet, means Lord, Master, Counselor, and Advisor. The second word, Rik, means chariot or wagon. Well, that's exactly what the surface story was. After he's given the Pharaoh's signet ring and title, he goes on this wagon, chariot, and he's paraded through the crowds, and they're yelling this name at him. So the name parallels what happened. Moses is basically giving you the clues that we've got composite words here. Pay attention to it. Okay, the town of Gerar. This is the town that after Abraham left the Pharaoh, after he got his wife/sister back, he goes to this town of Gerar. Now, if you remember the Bible story, the men of Gerar, he was scared of the men of Gerar because they thought he was going to kill him for his wife or girlfriend, whatever, or sister, whatever he presented it. So in fact, he tells the sister, say you're my sister so the men of Gerar don't murder me. He's telling you a very important clue here, by the way. The first two letters, Gerar, the first two letters means foreigner, pilgrim, or stranger. That's parallel to the story. Then the latter part of it, well, Abraham was a foreigner in this land. The last two letters, additional hey, Raha, which means to fear or to tremble. And that parallels the story, basically Abraham saying, the men of Gerar are killers, and I'm scared to live here. Ask yourself, why did he go there? There is a reason. I explained that in Volume 1. Abraham to Jacob explains everything about the story, decoding it correctly, why he bought it, why he sold his sister twice. Mount Sinai has like 7 different names that Moses gave it. They're all coded names, every one of them. So Moriah, supposedly Mount Sinai is in the land of Moriah, and that's what it's spelled like. So you take the word apart. Mora means teaching or instruction. The next word, Yod He, is short for the unspoken name of God, Yod He Vav He. And then the final instruction of God. So you get instruction of God or God's instruction. And that does describe what was in the cave in Mount Sinai. Something in there was instructing them. The cave of Machpelah. This is the one that I first came across, and I said, it's kind of a strange name, or why did they give the thing a name? So I took the name apart. And this is how it's spelled in Hebrew. The first part, Mach, is short for the Machan, which means place or site. The second word, Pila, means wonder or wonderful or miracle. The resulting is either a place of wonder or a miracle place. And I said, wait a minute, that can't be the name of a burial site. You got all your relatives and they're buried in caves, you know, in alcoves within this big cave. And why call it a miracle place? It's something else. And we're using it for something else. Ephron. Ephron was the Hittite that Abraham bought the cave from. Also, Joseph named his second son Ephraim, and you can kind of figure out Ephraim by swapping the M and the N, you got about the same word. And okay, anyway, Ephron, you take the word, the bet, it means, bet in the beginning always means in. Afar means dry earth or gold dust. And finally, the nun in the end is equal to 7 in small numbering, I explained to you. And that means Mount Sinai. And I'll explain it a little later why the number 7 means Mount Sinai. But you'd only know that if you found the real Mount Sinai and you saw it. And you saw what was unique about it. And I'm going to explain it to you. Other words that are coded words without going into it, but it's explained in the book. Mamre it describes, again, the hill, the mountain. And it basically means first sorrow or first bitterness. And that would be the burial cave where you're burying your relatives. Also going to mean what Joseph did later. Hebron, the word Gerar means to be united, to be bound or joined. The final nun is equal to 7 again in small numbering, and that is Mount Sinai. So it's bound to the Mount Sinai, or bound to the mountain. And rightfully so, when Abraham bought this place, and what was in it was so priceless, so unusual, he bound his family forever to the contents in it until it was finally covered over by Baruch. Baruch was the one who put the ark away and went to the grave with it where it was. He made sure no one knew where it was. He left clues in it, but I'll go into that in later books. Third code system. Oh, again, back to this. Sorry, it's the same code system. Mount Horeb. Another name for Mount Sinai. First part of the word, take it a word, and it means only or whole. The last two letters, abbreviation, richt, means resting place, only resting place. That's obviously Mount Sinai and the burial cave in it. Baal-zephon. Now, I figured this thing out. There's two ways of doping it out. And the reason I was able to find it, my expedition in 2002, I found it. Between junior college and regular college, I went gold mining to the Klondike in Dawson City, placer mining. I found gold. And before then, I was gold mining when I was in college to Mount Pinos area. It was a hard rock mining area. So I knew something about gold mining. Anyway, you take Baal-zephon apart. There's the spelling of it. Baal means to possess. The second part of the word, zephon, means hidden treasure. Isn't that funny? That's kind of funny. So to possess a hidden treasure. Could be a clue. It gets better than that, more descriptive. With this interpretation, you get, obviously, possession and hidden treasure. First part of the word, Baal, could also be close pronunciation of the Hebrew word bala, which means to be worn out or wasted. With this, you get a worn out hidden treasure. When I went there, I found hard rock mining and placer mining. And I knew it immediately. When I walked there, I saw quartz on the ground, chopped up quartz on the ground. I knew exactly what it was. And I examined it pretty good. They followed a vein of gold-bearing quartz for about a quarter of a mile. And there was a cave also. And the Egyptians destroyed most of the cave, and it will be explained to you in the story about Joseph. But this place was about 16 miles due east of Suez City. Now it's called, then it was called Ephraim. And the people from other countries from the world would come to Suez City or Ephraim. They'd buy the grain from Joseph, and the Bible clearly says, Pharaoh says, go buy the grain from Joseph. Joseph collected the money. There's a legend that says he took 2/3 of it, and 1/3 he gave to the Pharaoh. And so he stashed it in this place, and in the horizontal mine. And when he filled it up, he had slaves, Canaanite slaves, take it and help him bring it to guess where. Anyway, the other names that are encoded like this, Zipporah, Moses' wife, the name Joshua, Aaron, some of the tribal names of Simon, Naphtali, Benjamin, Zebulun, Pi-Haroth, Raphidim, Paran's another name for Mount Sinai, the area south of it, and Ammihud, which I'm going to go into in a second, and also in the second video. The fourth code system he uses is the algebraic term, if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, therefore A is equal to C. So, we'll start with the first one with the serpent. The serpent first shows up in the Garden of Eden story, the one that supposedly tempts Eve. Mary, God. Too many stories in my head. And it's left like that. Now, if you saw video series 2, you know the serpent wasn't the serpent. The apple wasn't an apple. And what these two people did, they did deliberately, knew exactly what they were doing. But you'll have to see video series 2 on the Hebrew alphabet and you'll understand. Okay. The second time it shows up, it's in Exodus and 4:17, where you have to picture it. He's not on top of the hill, like the movie shows. Forget the movie. Get it out of your head. He's inside a deep cave, and he trips some wire or some beam, and he sees a bush that's burning but is not consumed. I got news to you. That's a hologram. That's the only way you can have it, and you have a voice coming out of the area also. Then this rod is put in his hand. We all think it's a wooden staff. It wasn't a wooden staff at all. There's legends that say it wasn't a wooden staff either. And God instructs him to put it on the ground, and it becomes a serpent. And he grabs it by the tail, and it becomes a rod again. The second time the rod shows up with the snake is when he's in front of the Pharaoh, and the first time, and he does this trick. He puts the rod on the ground, it becomes a serpent, and eats the Pharaoh's magician serpents, and then he picks it up, becomes a rod again. That's a literary device by Moses. He's telling you very plainly. Remember the first time I mentioned the snake? The snake was not a snake. It was the rod. Got the picture? Like I said, it's a code book completely, from cover to cover. This is another example of A is equal to B, B is equal to C, the algebraic principle. It is the name, actually, that Moses told the congregation. Have you ever wondered why? Here's an important guy, and nobody names their kids after Moses or even Aaron. And even Moses' two kids, Gershom and Eliezer, I think Gershom's mentioned twice, and Eliezer's mentioned twice, but not with the same name, or close, but that's it. You'd think it would be mentioned much, much more than that. I think Joshua's mentioned over 20 times. So, let's continue. The first time, so in that example, Moses will be A, and Eliezer, his youngest son, will be B. The next time it's told, now, we have an expression where it says, Eliashima, son of Ammihud. Eliashima is Eliezer. That's mentioned 4 times in Numbers 1:10, 2:18, 7:48, 10:22. So put in algebraic terms, if Eliezer is Eliashima is equal to B, then Ammihud is equal to C. Therefore, Moses A is equal to C. Moses as Ammihud. In the next video, which is the first one I'm going to be covering is adjacent letter swaps, you'll find out what Ammihud means when you take it apart. I found a legend in Legend of the Jews. Here's the reference for it. Volume 3, Moses in the Wilderness. The 12 princes of the tribes, page 221. This is the legend. Eliashima, son of Ammihud, the name of the prince of the tribe of Ephraim, points to the story of Joseph and their forefathers. God said, Eliashima, he obeyed me, who bade him in innocent and not covert his master's wife that wanted to tempt him to sin. A little reference to Joseph and what was going on with Hatshepsut. And Ammihud, keep note, Ammihud, me he honored, and none other. Who was the only one who sat in front of the ark and talked to God? Wasn't Aaron. In fact, God told Moses, Aaron's not to come in here, he's going to die. And his two older boys, they both got fried, electrocuted. It was only Moses. That priest, probably from the first temple period, he discovered and knew the same thing I do, what I figured out. That Moses' name, he told the congregation, was this, Ammihud. Two other tribes named their kids Ammihud. It tells you, and they weren't the tribal names. So it was a famous person. And that's probably a shocker for some of you. 6 code system, the number 7 and what it means. Okay, number 7 is mentioned 185 times in the Torah. Chapter 41 has it mentioned 29 times alone. And that's about Joseph and the Pharaoh's dream and interpreting the dream. I'm not kidding. You can't make this stuff up. So this is what's special about it. You can see the candlestick has 7 branches. We have 7 days to the week. Moses has 7 names for Mount Sinai. I mean, it gets repeated over and over again. It's all explained in the book. But this is what's special about Mount Sinai. It's not a big hill, but one part is longer than it is wide. And there's 4 earthquake faults. 2 are opposite each other along the long side, and there's 2 on the short sides, both of them. And what happened, this is Cretaceous and Jurassic limestone. And over the millions of years, this thing popped up. And the limestone bent like this. It wasn't straight. In the process of bending and popping up, it has 7 clear fractures on one of the sides. Now, the other side also has some of the fractures, but you don't see them as well. Few you do, but the fractures go all the way through to the other side. The second expedition I funded in November of 1999, I had a German sedimentologist, PhD, and he saw it and he looked at it, as well as a graduate from the Colorado School of Mines, and they concurred that this is a very unusual hill. It may be totally unique on the planet. But anyway, that's what's unique. So when you see the number 7, it really means, in many of the cases, it's referring to Mount Sinai. Okay. Now this is chapter and verse code. This is the 7th code. 40, 60, and 70. I'll get on this side. You have to remember a little bit about the beginning in Genesis with Jacob and his great true love. 40 and 60, 70 is the chapter and verse total of chapter 37, verse 3, 23, and 33. All of them are translated either coat of many colors or a long sleeve coat. It wasn't that at all. You'll find out in a second. The Hebrew translates phrases this, as it appears in verse 3, and it appears slightly different with a hey in front of it. But the grand total is that. The word means, the first part of the word means skirt or tunic, except if you replace the nun for the mim, adjacent letter swaps. But I put it in here because it's a separate code system here, but to explain it to you. You get the word katim, which means fine gold, like that. The next word, patim, was a hard one to figure out. The translators, they had a hard time to figure the thing out. So if you drop the yud and change the mim to a lamed, you get the word pesel, which means a carved or cast idol. So you got a cast golden idol. And to prove my point that I'm right, and other priests, probably in the first temple period, knew this thing, was because there's nothing in the Torah that says what Terah did. There's a legend that says he made idols. And there's a legend there that says Abraham left because he destroyed some idols that the local king had or wanted, and he had to leave as a fugitive. So this was a family heirloom. Now, when Jacob left and lived in Haran and married, well, 2 wives and 2 concubines, his true love, I think it was Rebecca, she had a hard time giving birth, if you remember. So finally she gave birth to Joseph, and then they decided we're going to leave after 20 years. Enough is enough. With Laban's almost this whole herd of sheep. And she wound up stealing this. This is the Hittite fertility god, Telepenu. And in the Hebrew writings, when it describes the story, it's a word, the Hebrew word they have is extremely close to this pronunciation. So that's the god. It wasn't Baal. It was this thing, Telepenu. And she stole this idol that we assume that what Terah, Abraham's father, made or used to make. And she stole it. That's why Laban chased after them, because it was a valuable family heirloom and it was gold. She was sitting on it, pregnant, and the story is like that, it says it. And she didn't get off the horse or the donkey, and she was sitting on the thing. But God got even with her. She died when giving birth to Benjamin, which tells you never piss off the operating system of the universe. He will make your life utterly, totally miserable or kill you. So now you know the gift that Jacob gave Joseph. It wasn't a piece of what they call shmata. It was a golden calf, the fertility god, Telepenu. That's what he got. So all the other brothers thought, my God, if he's going to get this, then we're not going to get as big an inheritance when Dad died, so we better unload this guy and get rid of him as fast as possible. And they did. And so, to give you an example of this, about the 40, 60, and 70. In the Judges period, the surface story has ridiculous numbers for the judges. They have one guy at 80, living a judge for 80 years. If it was a priest, he doesn't become a priest until he's in his 20s or he's 20 years old. That means he'd be 100 years old, he's a judge. Forget it. He'd be lucky he's still alive. If you look at the 40 and the 80, 40 is 1 and 80 is 2, then you replace it. This is the correct numbers. It comes out to 180 years. If you take the surface story of the oppressor years and the judges years, it comes to a total of 414. That's too many years. Now, I get a number for the end of the judges period of 1020 BCE. That's the same year number that Oxford University comes up with also. They're right and I'm right. But now you understand when you see 40, like it says Moses went back up to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights without food and water. Forget it. You know that can't be. You're not going to live past 3 days without water. So it was 1 day in the cave, 1 day out of the cave. That's it. Same thing with Elijah. One day he hikes 1 day from Beersheba into the wilderness, sees an angel, and he says, you're going to have to eat this food for 40 days and 40 nights. It's mentioned twice. There's 2 more days. 8th code system, number 400. That's easy. Abraham buys the cave and the surrounding hill and the mountain, you know, the hill and the land around it, probably up to the wadi, for 400 shekels of silver. I'm going to go into it in volume 1. Where he got the money, that'll surprise you. Anyway, first time the 400 is mentioned is in Genesis 15:13, even before Abraham buys the cave. And it says that God says, your people will be servants in a strange land for 400 years. Okay. The next time it shows up is in Exodus chapter 12, 40, and 41, where it says 430 years. So why the difference? Now, it says in the surface story, Joseph was 30 years old when he became prime minister. So, but why say, maybe that's why they put the 30 in there? No, that would still be wrong. He wasn't sold into slavery until he was 17 years old. 17 from 30 gives you 13. It should be then 413 years. Why the difference? Why 400 and why 430? Okay, the trick is I figured out who Joseph was in Egypt. I may be the only one who ever did. He was Sanmut, and it's spelled with only one N, not two N's. I saw a cartouche of his. There's only one N in it, not two. Sometimes the spelling is Saninmut. It's not. It's Sanmut. Anyway, in Hebrew small numbering, this is how you'd spell Sanmut in Hebrew. It totals 30 in small numbering. So what Moses is saying when he's writing this in Exodus 4:30, he's saying that 11 of the 12 tribes became slaves because of what Joseph did by putting this money he took into the family burial cave. That's what he's saying loud and clear, but it's all in code. Next video is going to cover the adjacent letter swapping, where you'll see more proof about Ammihud and other ones. The correct length of the sacred cubit, and what the number 12,068 and why it shows up so many times in code within the Torah. These parts you can't figure out unless you come in through the science side of it. I guess my parting words to theologians, rabbis, and ministers, this stuff you probably didn't learn in seminary or yeshivas. Don't feel bad about it. I don't want you to think I think anything less of you. You couldn't have known this stuff. Much of it was long since forgotten, probably after the First Temple period, for obvious reasons. One, Baruch did not want people to know where this cave was. The numbering systems kind of disappeared. And I'll cover this again when I go through part 2 of this video, of this series. So don't feel bad. I don't want you to think that I think anything less of you, or that you're not smart to figure this out. Your teachers didn't know this. Maimonides didn't know a lot of this stuff. He didn't know because he couldn't have known this stuff. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll learn something. And the next video is going to be a little bit longer than this one, but it's going to be stuff you really want to know, and some of it may scare you because of the 12,068. It's definitely embedded in the Torah, and you'll find out why. Thank you.